Oh man, this video is going to be a doozy. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So I have finally beaten Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 1, the original release. And let me tell you, this has been a huge weight off my shoulders. And I know that kind of sounds bad, but to understand why I've had this weight on me, if anybody's been watching some of my previous videos, you'll know that I am kind of like the PlayStation 1 guy. I love collecting PlayStation 1 stuff. I love playing PlayStation 1 games. It's sort of my shtick. It's what I've identified with when it comes to like collecting, and it's the console I have the most nostalgia with. And I'm sure with me saying all that stuff to you, you're like, how have you never played Final Fantasy VII? Yeah, I've heard that a lot. How have I never completed Final Fantasy VII, but PlayStation 1 is my favorite console? So for years and years, I have had that game on my backlog, and I've, started it, played a decent chunk, put it off, started it again later on like a new save file because I forgot what was going on. Same thing usually ends up happening, and I just kind of kept going on this cycle with this game over and over again. And I think what really broke me was when they did the Final Fantasy VII remake, and everybody was talking about how incredible that game was. But there were so many people that said you have to finish the first Final Fantasy game to really fully appreciate what the remake is doing. From what I understand, in the remake, they kind of take some of the story beats and they're changing some things up. And adding extra context to some of the things I think that happened in the original release as well. So yeah, long story short, for me, this game has sort of almost become like my white whale for this console, as weird as that sounds. And it's not like a white whale as in like, oh, I've been hunting for a copy of this game. I mean, I've owned it for forever at this point. And it's not very hard to find. It's more of my white whale as in like, when am I ever going to like sit down and just really absorb myself into this game and just finish it? It's really just a super long-winded way of me saying, I finally found some time and was able to finish it. So let's actually just jump into the review. Sorry that was so long-winded. I think where I'm going to start off is not necessarily with the story or, going over the history and stuff. I just want to talk about the battle mechanics, because I think with RPGs, this is one part that a lot of people, maybe to me at least, leave out or kind of ignore in lieu of talking about, the more exciting parts of the story and stuff like that. But really what you're engaging with most of the time in these games is going to be the combat system. So let's start off with my favorite thing about this game, and that is going to be the materia system. Now, I'm not exactly super well versed in Final Fantasy games. I haven't played a lot of them. This is actually only the second one I've ever completed, although I have started and made some progress in multiple games, but 9 and 7 are really the only two I've ever played to completion. So 9 is going to be kind of like the backbone that I'm looking at the materia system based on. And honestly, I don't understand why games in this genre haven't adopted this materia system. I think it's absolutely genius. One of the only other games I can think of that offer this amount of customization with any character that you're playing with is actually a very recently released title, Metaphor Refantasio, where you can basically equip any character with any class in that game as well, similar to this game. I mean, even the Persona games to a certain extent as well allow you to have a lot of like customization on your own personal character, but Final Fantasy VII and Metaphor both let you completely set up your party and deck out your characters in any kind of fashion that you want to, and I absolutely loved that about this game. Don't get me wrong, these characters do have predisposed strengths that kind of lend themselves to certain play styles, but by no means does this game force you in any way to do that. And honestly, after you've leveled them up enough, especially if you are leveling them up in a way where you want them to be a mage or you want them to be kind of like a warrior, those base stats that you get start to matter a lot less later on. Now, some highlights here for me: if you're familiar with the Blue Mage class in the other Final Fantasy games, my only experience with the Blue Mage class really is Quina or Kina in Final Fantasy IX. Basically what the Blue Mage class does is you can steal spells from monsters. And the way you would go about doing that in Final Fantasy IX was a bit cumbersome. Obviously, you were predisposed to only use one character to do this, and that was Quina. No other characters could actually do this, which is fine. Most traditional Final Fantasy games go about it this way. Not every character is completely customizable. But you had to get them super low health, and then she would eat them, and when you would eat them at that low HP threshold, she would gain the ability. Now, that was kind of frustrating for a multitude of different reasons. One of them being if you got really powerful and there was like a spell that you wanted to collect earlier on in the game from a certain monster, half the time you're just one-shotting that enemy, and it was really quite difficult to get them into that certain health threshold when you were at those higher levels to actually consume them to get the spell. The other issue with it to me also was you don't actually know what the health bar is of these enemies. I mean, if you've fought them enough times, you can start to kind of guess and get a feel for it, but without like a guide or a walkthrough giving the exact HP amount and then you kind of like mentally recording as you're doing damage, it was super hard to know when you were supposed to use this ability to gain the blue magic spell. Final Fantasy VII takes a completely different approach to this. There is no blue mage, as I was just kind of describing how that materia system works. Anybody could be a blue mage, and you get something called the enemy skill materia, and all that you have to do is get hit by the spell that you want to absorb or learn from the enemy, and once you get hit from it, boom, you learn it, just like that. It's super easy, and there's a lot of different ways that you can get very strong spells early on in the game if you know what you're doing and you're smart about it, and I just absolutely loved it. And not only could you be a blue mage on any character, but you also get a total of possible 4 copies of the enemy skill materia as you're playing through the game. So nobody really ends up getting left out from being able to get this ability. You could equip the enemy skill materia to your entire party, which, although sounds a little OP, you still do have to go out of your way and actually get hit by these spells and then complete the battle, because obviously if you lose and die, you're going to get a game over screen. So I just thought it was a lot more engaging than, to me, the way that it sounds like they've done it in the past. And I believe there's also a blue mage in Final Fantasy VI. Never got to really experience it, but it seems like, to me, the enemy skill materia is just the best way to go about this. I absolutely loved being able to, learn new spells using that ability. And also, compared to some of the other Final Fantasies I've played, the combat is surprisingly engaging. Honestly, Final Fantasy IX, and I've played through a decent chunk of 6 and even 4, and I also played through a lot of 12 too, and these games, it just kind of seems like you could sort of mash your way to a victory in most of them. Don't get me wrong, you're going to run into like the occasional bad guy or occasional boss that does pose some greater challenge and different kinds of threats to change things up. But to me, Final Fantasy VII had the widest variety of like enemies that just did certain strange things when I was like roaming around the map. Like I'd run into one and they'd hit me with a really weird spell I hadn't seen before that would just like automatically KO one of my party members, or would give me like a countdown, or I would try to damage them and I just wouldn't do any damage. And I was like, why am I not doing damage? Oh, I need to use certain spell, or I need to wait for them to be in a certain pose, or a different variety of things to actually get over even just random encounters. It wasn't exclusive to just bosses. I think the most famous example of the game doing this is going to be like the opening boss with the scorpion guy. He's like that mech scorpion. I don't know exactly what he's called, but if you attack him, I believe while his tail's raised, he's going to do a boatload of damage to you. But if you choose to sit and wait for him to lower his tail, you will take a lot less damage when you go to attack him. And I believe you also deal more damage as well. Doesn't really matter, but yeah, just having that kind of dynamic gameplay in the battles made a lot of the battles a lot more interesting, and it was kind of weird to me that they went away from that in later entries. I haven't played Final Fantasy VIII at all yet, so I don't know if they also do this in Final Fantasy VIII, but just from the other games that I have played, this is the only one that really seemed like it went super far into this. And honestly, sometimes it can be annoying. Like, the encounter rate in this game's relatively high, and when you have to be constantly mentally engaged with some of these gimmicks that you get in these battles, It can make the battles like kind of drawn out and last longer, and maybe that's why they stepped away from this. But honestly, for me, what you could have done in this game in particular is you could have like lowered the encounter rate and maybe made like the golden XP a little bit higher, and just had these like more engaging battles rather than just like spamming you with constant like easy stuff, or you know, giving you a lot of hard battles that you got to concentrate for, but having the frequency of it be a little too high. That was my only gripe with it, is really the encounter rate throughout most of this game to me is quite high, even compared to like 9, which I thought also had a pretty high encounter rate. But I digress. Overall, I think the combat system in this is like one of the best. It's really, really good, between being able to deck your party out any way you want with materia, the more engaging encounters and boss battles. I just think that honestly, like gameplay wise, moment to moment, this game did a really, really excellent job. And one more thing before I get onto the story, I really want to talk about the music in this game. This is probably one of my favorite soundtracks of any game I've like ever played. And actually, I've, you know, gotten through a few JRPGs now, and you know, this genre is known for having fantastic music. Final Fantasy IX, Parasite Eve, Chrono Cross. Final Fantasy VII stands like toe-to-toe to me with Final Fantasy IX. I would have to go back and probably play through 9 again, or listen to the track side by side to really determine which one I like more. But both of the games, I mean, honestly, are like A and B to me. I mean, they're just both fantastic. I mean, Nobuo Uematsu just does such a good job evoking emotions in these soundtracks that a lot of other games don't really get out of me. And I don't know what it is about his compositions in particular, but yeah, his music is just so good. And every time I go into a new area, or you know, a certain kind of cutscene happens or a certain story beat's going on, what ends up lingering in my mind more is the music playing during these scenes, evoking these emotions out of me, rather than, you know, necessarily what is happening in the scene itself. Honestly, it's just absolutely fantastic stuff. Anybody that hasn't, you know, fully experienced this game, if you're gonna go and, you know, do anything with this game at all and you're not interested in playing it, just listen to the soundtrack like front to back. It's just actually one of the best art pieces ever. But alright, now let's get into the story, and I've been kind of holding this part off because I do have quite a few thoughts on it, and I'm sure that not everybody's going to be super happy with what they have to hear about what I'm going to say about the story, but just hear me out. Overall, before I really dive into things, I just want to say I think the story is good. I actually think it's really great. It's just maybe some of the pacing's a little off, so let's just go right into it and just talk about the opening Midgar mission. The opening Midgar section is some of the tightest writing and pacing that you'll get throughout the entire game. Everything seems so well thought out in like your first, I would say, about like 10 hours of this game. From the opening scene with Aerith and the pan out seeing Midgar and like the classic Final Fantasy screen, and then like panning in and like jumping off the train, and you go in and you blow up the reactor and you gotta escape, and you know, then you go down to the slums and you kind of start getting a little closer to all the characters. You get to know Barrett a little more and what he's about. You run into Tifa and you see that there's some sort of relationship between Cloud and her, but it's a little more complicated, and it's kind of nice that they give you that little nugget at the beginning, which they build on much later on in the story. And even when you actually bump into Aerith and she's just like some flower girl that you don't know anything about, falling into her like church and everything, and then them going to blow up the second reactor, and then everything kind of like going crazy as you see the slums and everything get completely destroyed, and most of the team ends up dying during this whole ordeal. And then I think where this game really starts to expand, when it starts out as this really like kind of tightly more condensed story, without a whole lot going on. I mean, there's a lot of talk about like saving the world and how like the energy from the planet is being harnessed. And it really gives you this feeling of like, you know, it's relatable to stuff that we see nowadays where people are just like destroying the earth to, you know, make money. And even Shinra existing as like this mega corporation that got so much power that they completely took over the government for I'm sure a lot of us Americans feels somewhat relatable as well. And then like exploring Shinra, and then having the whole story expand with Sephiroth making an appearance, even though he was only kind of like some whisperings from earlier on in the game. And I mean, who can forget about like the classic part where you got to go and save Tifa, and she, you got to cross dress, and there's like Don Corleo or whatever his name is, who's just an absolute ham. And the whole first 10 hours of this game is just super well put together. It's a lot of fun. I mean, and you're not sitting there worried about like grinding or anything. Like the levels of all the enemies you run into are really tight and like well paced, where you don't ever feel like overpowered. It's just, I don't want to say it's the best part of the game, because I don't think it's the part that stuck with me the most or is my favorite. But I think it's so memorable because I'm sure many people like myself, played a decent chunk of this game but never finished it because of time commitments. And for a lot of people, this opening sequence is the whole game for them. I mean, it's like, to them, it is the best part. And I think it makes this game stand way above a lot of the other Final Fantasies, because the opening is so action-packed and so tight, where some of the other games have a bit of a slower burn up until you start getting into some of the action. Now, after Midgar is where I start to have some issues with the game, and it's actually the part of the game where I took the most breaks. Now, don't get me wrong, you do get some cool little story beats as you're kind of going through some of these different areas, but everything after Midgar kind of just feels like, oh, let's just go as a group and just hop from town to town. I mean, you kind of become like this traveling little ragtag group, and I mean, like I said, you do get some good story beats as you're going through these different towns and places, but the overarching story that's going on, to me, doesn't really make a whole lot of progress during this time. And there's certain sections of this that kind of slog on. For some reason, the like golden saucer area kind of comes to mind, and Rufus's like coronation section also sticks out as like two particularly big pain points for me for some reason. And that's just like off the top of my head. This isn't something I like wrote down, but for whatever reason, those two sections of the game were like some of the most boring to me, outside of like some really specific story beats, like I said. But when you end up going to the Temple of the Ancients, that's when the story really starts to pick up. And I mean, it's very obvious that this is, a huge turning point in the story, because this is obviously, spoiler warning if anybody has no idea, this is where Aeris ends up dying. But you end up learning a lot more about Cloud, you end up learning a lot more about his relationship with Tifa. There's just a lot of things going on there and a lot of tension, and then you also see Cloud struggle as a character, during some of these scenes. And obviously, if you've been using Aerith throughout most of the game, which I'm sure a lot of individuals would, because she, up to that point, probably is your most powerful party member. I mean, she's like crazy strong and OP mage like throughout the entire game. So I think they did that very intentionally so that you would get connected to her and you'd be like, oh my gosh, she's awesome, she's such a killer, she can heal my whole party, deal the most damage, and you just kind of get this connection with her just for them to pull the rug out from you and take her away from you, and that ends up feeling really impactful. Now, before you actually get to the Temple of the Ancients, the other really awesome part to me was going and seeing the flashback with Nibelheim, with Cloud, as they, go through kind of like Sephiroth's backstory and everything and why he is the way he is. That was another really good part of the game. But yeah, everything else, like going to like Costa del Sol and like, I don't know, going to Calm and I mean, like there's like Barrett's backstory, which is really awesome too, but like I said, a lot of that stuff ends up being a little bit forgettable to me. It's not like I didn't like it. Even like Red 13's backstory and his town in the canyon ends up, pulling on the heartstrings a little bit, but it still felt like it was so detached from the main story that was going on that I was like, okay, that was like a cool little side thing. I'm ready to get back on, the main story track. And it basically takes all of disc 1 to like really start getting things going with the main story. And disc 1 is pretty much, I think, like it took me 30 hours, maybe even a little longer. So I just feel like a lot of that could have been tightened up. And with the remake, I kind of am worried that I'm going to feel this same way, because it really feels like they're majorly stretching the story out. You know, maybe they give some of these side characters a little more time. I mean, I thought that they gave like a perfectly decent amount of time of character development to characters in this game. I mean, for another example, looking at Final Fantasy IX, I kind of thought, I think her name's Freya. They kind of left her story on the back burner. She didn't get any conclusion, really, to her, like, turmoil and trials, and it just felt like maybe they ran out of time or something like that, or they just cut it to make the story a little more tighter. But I do appreciate that they give Barrett, like, a full story arc. They give Red 13 a full story arc. Later on in the game, even said they give, like, a full story arc, but, I mean, at least he ties into the main plot a little bit more than Barrett and Red 13 do. But almost every single side character in this game gets their own, like, side quests and stories and stuff like that, which is, to me, is really awesome. Where I think other Final Fantasies, like 9, they kind of forget about some of their side characters, or they just end up being just that, a side character, where they don't really get a very developed story. I think everything after the Temple of the Ancients is like some of my favorite parts in the game. I mean, this is where you really start to like understand a lot of even like the weird side characters more. Like the Shinra grunt guys that are always wearing suits. I forget exactly what their group was called. But they have a lot of like cool little moments where they, you know, obviously they work for Shinra and they have like a job to do, but they let you get away with quite a bit. And I think it's because they show some character and they show like an understanding of like what they're actually starting to fight for. And maybe, you know, at the end of the day, Shinra might not be right. They kind of let you get away with a lot of stuff. But also like going to like the North Crater and like, I don't know why, I just really loved like the snowboarding section of that particular part of the story. I just had a lot of fun with it. And that's actually another gripe I kind of have with the game, is that it's got a lot of mini games to like progress the story through. They're not optional, it's like actually a part of the story. And it seems to me like the other Final Fantasy games don't do this quite as much. Like, you know, the escape from Midgar, riding on the motorcycle, like it's super iconic, but at the same time I just thought the mechanics were like really jank and I didn't enjoy it all that much. There's another part of the game where you're in a submarine and you got to take out you know, the enemy's submarine to get their big materia, and it's like I didn't really particularly enjoy that a whole lot either. There's some other examples that I'm not thinking of at the top of my head, but the snowboarding one, totally worth it, and I had a lot of fun with it. I don't know why, I thought it was really cool. Maybe it's because there weren't any big consequences. Like you could crash and screw up quite a bit without anything really happening. I don't know if even like crashing at all like affects anything. It to me it was just like, oh, here's some snowboarding, like have fun. So I kind of liked that. I actually think like my least favorite part of that section of the game was climbing the mountain. It just felt like it took forever because you have to do it in 3 different stages, and the dungeon here isn't like particularly engaging or interesting to me. I don't know, maybe for other people they liked it more, but I was just like, wow, this like trek up to the crater is really long and arduous. Like I'm just like, good God, can I just get there already? Basically, all I was asking is, you know, maybe make it a little bit shorter. I don't know if it needed to be a 3-tiered, like, super long dungeon like it was, but I digress. I mean, everything that happens after this point where, you know, Cloud kind of, like, loses it, and he gets lied to, and he thinks he's just, like, a clone, basically, and doesn't even really think he's a real person. You know, it really made me realize that people, I think, misunderstand Cloud, and this kind of goes back to people maybe only playing through the Midgar section of this game. They always say he's like this like brooding, like no personality protagonist. And yeah, he is for probably like the entire first disc, but after that point, like his personality really starts to come through, and it's like a lot of regressed memories, like a lot of it for him, and you know, maybe it's like the shell that he put up around him, which is why he like is so like brooding. It's the trauma that he went through, and they like really dive deep into that, and like I love the connection with him and Tifa in this game. You know, for a while I was like, I don't get what the hype with Tifa is. Everybody's like, Tifa's the best girl, Tifa's an awesome character, and I'm like, okay, I don't know, is it because she's got like, you know, whatever, but towards the end of the game, I totally understand what people are talking about now. She's probably my favorite character in the game, outside of like actually probably Cloud and Sid. I really loved their connection and how they walked through the trauma that Cloud had gone through as a kid, and even growing up and like living through all this stuff, and just really found that to be really interesting. And then from that point on, Cloud really does kind of become his own character. He drops that whole facade, and he doesn't have that shell on anymore, and he's his own person. And I don't know, I just really thought that was super impactful, at least for me. Just to go back to Sid really quick, I absolutely fucking love him, and I felt like swearing there just because that's basically his whole shtick throughout the game. Is they have a ton of little like blurped out like swears that he does, and then like I think during the end cutscene he says like damn and bitch or something like that, and it's like, so you blurped it out throughout everything else, but then like the CGI like final cutscene they just let it go through. I don't know, it was kind of funny. But yeah, Sid's like such an awesome character. I kind of love his story as well, how he's bitter about not being able to go to space and everything, and he's really mean to his like basically co-scientist that is the reason why he never went to space. And he kind of has this whole story arc towards the end, and it actually ties into the main story when you have to go and the meteor's coming down and the rocket's going to go up, and they're trying to destroy the meteor with his rocket that he's been trying to send off into space. And you end up going out into space and steal the big materia that's on the ship, just to like basically eject it. And during this whole sweet sequence, I believe it's like one of the fuel reactors or something like that, they end up breaking and going bad, which is why his co-worker scientist ended up shutting down his plans to go and fly up. Was that she was saying that there was something wrong with it, and then he realized that she was right the whole time, that there was something wrong. And in that moment he kind of like forgives her, and she even forgives him in her own way. And I don't know, I really liked his whole story. I liked his character. I mean, he's got a cigarette in his mouth the whole time, and he's got like a pack of cigs packed in. I mean, he looks cool. I mean, I could sit here and gush about like the certain side characters all day, but just to kind of, you know, finish things off, we'll talk about the ending parts of the story here. And actually one part that I really liked, that I kind of forgot to mention. This isn't like a comprehensive review or anything. I just kind of wanted to like spout, you know, most of my thoughts off the top of my head and just give you guys my initial, you know, feelings about the game. But the portion where you lose Cloud after being in the Northern Crater, and he ends up kind of getting sucked into the life stream, and you take control of Tifa, and you go through that whole segment where Weapon is coming and trying to like destroy Junon, and like you're about to get, you know, put up to death, as, you know, to show everybody like, hey, these are the people that made the meteor happen. We're gonna kill them to prove a point or whatever, to make you know, the citizens feel good. Obviously you do like this whole escape sequence, which is super awesome. I loved the escape sequence in this. But just getting that time away from Cloud and really connecting more, especially with like Tifa and some of your other party members that maybe you haven't been utilizing quite as much, really made me feel connected to the whole group a lot more than I think it would have if they just, you know, left Cloud as your main party member throughout the entire game. It kind of makes the ending where they all come together as a group to, you know, conquer Sephiroth and try to save the world feel a lot more real than I think it did throughout most of the game, because although these characters do get their own side plots and stuff, you kind of only feel connected with the members that you pick to mainly be in your party. Where these ending sections of the game, especially like I said, when you don't have Cloud, it forces you to use these party members that you have underutilized probably for most of the game. And I don't know, it just made me feel a lot more connected with them. Final Fantasy IX kind of does a similar thing, and I think they did it to greater effect in that game than what Final Fantasy VII did, but I still think 7 did a really good job integrating in a lot of the, you know, lesser used characters depending on how you were doing your playthrough. And I don't know what it is, but, you know, actually going down the crater itself to go and meet Sephiroth, that whole sequence, and like a lot of the enemies are actually quite difficult, and the music in this part is so like heroic, but also is a little melancholic at the same time. I just absolutely loved the music in these areas, in this particular part of the game. And even when you finally, go down and reach Sephiroth, you do like a 3-tiered boss battle where at first you fight Genova, and then you fight, Sephiroth's kind of like first form, and then you have to fight his like god form, where obviously like probably the best track in the entire game plays. One Winged Angel. It's the most iconic Final Fantasy song probably forever. But I mean, the absolute scale of this fight is awesome. I mean, he uses this spell that unironically takes 2 minutes long. I can't remember what the exact name of it is, but he basically brings in this like comet or meteor, and it like destroys Pluto, and like it destroys Venus and like a couple other planets as it like hits the sun and makes the sun expand and like destroy 3 more planets as it comes to Earth. And then like he basically hits you with the fucking sun, and somehow you don't just get absolutely one shot after this. I mean, what's hilarious to me is he casted this thing 3 times. I'm like, oh my god, Pluto's come back to life just to get killed again. I mean, it's so over the top and everything, and like I think that's another minor gripe of the game is some of the casts in this game are like just so unbelievably long. I mean, like Knights of the Round is notorious for being like minutes long. I can't remember how long it's like 5 minutes or something like that to get that spell off, or that summon off, and a lot of the other summons are really long too, but I don't know. I think it adds to some of the charm of the game. I wish they kind of would have done what Final Fantasy IX did, where, after you've seen the spell casted and you see like the entire animation, once or twice, they'll just do like a quick version of the animation and just get it over with, which to me is a much better approach. And obviously you would expect like an iteration later on down the line to improve on this. So it's hard for me to like rip on Final Fantasy VII for this in particular, but they were trying to show off like the 3D hardware and stuff like that at the time, and I don't know. It just, to me, it adds a lot of charm to the game. But like, yeah, once I saw this 2-minute long animation for the 3rd time, I was just like, okay, I'm gonna go get something to drink. Like, I don't know. It just ended up making me laugh. I thought it's like a fully epic fight. And actually, I think that this ending and the final boss and everything is handled a lot better than what Final Fantasy IX was. I mean, Final Fantasy IX's final boss was like really random, and like God just shows up out of nowhere and just tries to kill everybody for like no good reason, where it felt good that it was Sephiroth, and like even once you finally beat him, you kind of go through the sequence, then Cloud realizes Sephiroth himself is still alive and you fall into the life stream. And then it's just Cloud and him in like their human forms doing like a standoff sword to sword, and Cloud gives it to him, kills him right there and then. Feels super liberating, especially for Cloud, to get him back for kind of like destroying this whole village and killing everybody he knows essentially outside of Tifa. Yeah, just a really good ending. And then they kind of leave. I mean, the final cutscene is just so epic. I mean, they always are in these games, but as the meteor's coming down and like the spell Holy, you finally like kind of unlock it, which is what Aerith was trying to pray for, which gets revealed at the end of the game too. And it still can't stop the meteor, but then you kind of see the life force also all come, and you kind of like it implies that Aerith's kind of like soul or her life force is like driving all this other life force to like do this to help the planet and save everything, and leave it kind of ambiguous. They're like, oh, did it land? Did it break through? And as you go through the credits at the very end, you realize that it didn't, and you kind of see that maybe the Earth is back to normal. I mean, like Shinra seems to be completely destroyed, and you can kind of see the old Midgar is completely covered in like trees and other like grass and stuff like that 500 years later. Some people say it's implied that like everybody died, like all humans died, and I don't really think that that's the case. I think everybody ended up living, but to me it more implies that everybody had a much more simple like lifestyle. Like they weren't using the life force in the planet and like destroying the planet to harness energy anymore. They were just living in like their small towns and stuff like that, and living more frugally without obviously, like I said, destroying the planet. But yeah, that basically goes through everything I remember off the top of my head with the story and my feelings on it. Honestly, I think what took me so long to finish this game just to get my final thoughts out there. The translation actually is quite bad. I heard it was not good when I was going into it, and getting through like the Midgar section, I thought it was okay, but you know, the translation team apparently was on a huge time crunch, and I think you can really tell as this game kind of goes further on. Like I said, that Midgar section's so tight, but like there's some parts where characters are talking to each other, and it doesn't really, to me, make a whole lot of sense the way the dialogue is exchanged between these two characters. They're just kind of saying things, but there's not any like emotion, or I don't know how to put it. The way that they're talking just doesn't feel very natural. I'll put it that way. It feels a little like robotically maybe translated in that way. Like it gets the point across. I understood what was going on in the story, but I know this sounds like heresy, and like a lot of people hate the Ted Woolsey translations, but that's something that he brought to some of those other Final Fantasy games that he translated before, and even Chrono Trigger, was he gave a little personality twist on like the way these certain bits of dialogue were said that I think really made you feel a lot more connected to the characters and stuff. And I know I just got done saying that like a lot of these certain story beats made me feel more connected to the characters, but at the end of the day, like I feel way more strongly towards characters like Vivi or Steiner or even Dagger in Final Fantasy IX than I do about some of the Final Fantasy VII characters, and I think it just has a lot to do with the way their personalities were portrayed in Final Fantasy IX. Like the jokes hit a lot better. The way that they interact with dialogue feels a lot more natural in that game, and I think that's where Final Fantasy VII kind of missed for me, and I don't think it has anything to do with the game itself. I'm actually kind of excited to go and play the remake, just to, you know, get a better translation, honestly, so I can feel a little bit more connected with some of these characters, because yeah, I think with an improved translation, this easily could have been like my favorite Final Fantasy game. It really is a bummer that, to me, and it's not the worst translation in the world. Like I said, you will understand the story and you'll understand what's going on. It's just some of the extra love and care that I think needed to go into some of these more nuanced moments in the game. They just weren't there. But yeah, that's about it. Really quick, I wrote down some of my favorite tracks in the game, so I figured I would just mention that at the end here. Tifa's theme, one of my favorites, obviously. Flowers blooming in the church, obviously. I think some less popular ones that I really loved in this game is In Search of the Man in Black. It's so ambient, and I really love the kind of energy it gives to some of the environments that it's played in. Birth of a God plays in the boss battle right before you face like the God version of Sephiroth, and One Winged Angel plays. Obviously, One Winged Angel like completely takes over, you know, like that. Obviously it takes over, right? Like that song is so good and so fantastic, but I think that this song, you know, Birth of a God, gets a little forgotten, and honestly it's such a banger of a boss theme. I mean, it's really, really good. It's just, you play that right before One Winged Angel, and it's like, obviously people are gonna forget. And the last one I wanted to bring up was Reunion. This one plays like in kind of the swamp area and a couple other places in the final moments of the game, and you know, I just really loved that track. It just evoked a kind of like weird melancholic feeling out of me, especially when you're coming towards the end of the game and you're kind of like taking in the fact that you're about to be done. It really hit different. I liked that track a lot. Now my least favorite tracks, I don't think these are probably that controversial either. These tracks actually grated me so bad that to me, the music in this game is so good, but like its worst tracks were so annoying to me that it made these areas like almost impossible for me to sit in. Like I wanted to just turn the volume off. It drove me absolutely crazy. The Golden Saucer, God, I hated it. It's really loud. Like it's way louder, I feel like, than the other tracks in the game, unless it's just so grating on my ears that it seems louder. But I swear, like, I turned the volume down in this area because it just seems like it's playing this theme park music at like max volume. And I get that we're trying to like evoke this like carnival kind of like feeling and music, like playing around and stuff, but it's just too noisy. It's too much. I really don't like it. It makes it like, I know there's a ton of cool, fun mini games in the Golden Saucer that you can like interact with. I didn't do any of it. I wanted to get in and out of this place as quickly as possible because the music drove me absolutely crazy. And then the other one was Rufus's welcoming ceremony. It's like this really generic, like just marching band tune, and I don't know why. It just like goes on like a 5-second loop. I don't know if the song's actually that short. I'm pretty sure it's longer than that, but like oh my gosh, I don't know. It made that whole section of Junon just like torture on the ears for me, and I was just like, I don't care about marching with this group and like being in disguise. I don't care about this. I don't care about Rufus. Like, just get me out of this place so this music can stop and I can get on to like the story that I actually care about. Because up to that point, I was just like, I just don't care about Rufus. I don't care about all this stuff. I want to see like Sephiroth. I want to see what's going on. But anyways, yeah, outside of those two like big negatives for me, the soundtrack is like one of the best ever. It's just those two particular songs are just so bad. And like, I'll be honest, Final Fantasy IX and Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger don't really have those like super bad tracks for me. Maybe there's like one in Final Fantasy IX I just wasn't like the biggest fan of, but like it never was grating to me like these other two tracks where they just like absolutely drove me crazy. But yeah, I mean, overall, guys, I gotta say, it's a really fantastic game. Obviously, the hype for this game, probably a little bit higher than, you know, what it should be. I think my expectations were way up here when this game's like showing its age a little bit. It's older. We've seen a lot of JRPGs come out after this one and like refine this formula and refine this kind of storytelling and even like the combat system and stuff in a much more complete package than what I think this original game provides. But I mean, it still was really good to go back to. It's always good to go back to these kinds of games and understand like the roots of, you know, RPGs, JRPGs, especially for what we experience over here in the West, because I think this was the first big JRPG Western release that we've seen. But yeah, like I said, I'm not knocking on the game at all. Would I say it's like my favorite game ever? No. But would I say it's a very good game and it's definitely worth your time? Absolutely. I totally think this game was worth my time. I'm super glad I beat it. I'm glad I don't have this weight on my shoulders anymore. And I'm glad I got to experience this story finally. It's a really fantastic story. It's laid out in a good way. Outside of like the translation issues and some of the pacing problems I have, it's definitely worth experiencing this story. It's actually very unique, even for today's standards. I think the way that this story goes and the storytelling and the world that they built here is super unique, and it still isn't something that we've seen replicated, in my opinion, since then. So yeah, honestly, great game. Thank you all for watching. Hope to see you guys in another video.